You picked up your phone this morning before you said a single word to another human being, before your eyes were even fully open. And here's the part that should unsettle you. You probably don't remember doing it. That's not a habit. A habit is something you choose. What we're talking about is something that was designed by very smart people with very large financial incentives to happen without your consent. And by the end of this, you're going to understand exactly how they did it. What if the loneliness you feel, that creeping low-grade background radiation loneliness that never quite goes away no matter how many notifications you get, what if that's not a flaw in you? What if it's a feature, a deliberate byproduct of a system built not to connect you but to keep you reaching? And what if the boredom they took away from you was actually doing something your brain desperately needed? Keep that question. We're coming back to it. Go back to 1995. You're waiting for a bus, no phone, no anything. So you just wait. You watch pigeons. You think about something embarrassing you said 3 years ago. You exist uncomfortably inside your own skull. And somehow, you survive it. But something else was happening in that uncomfortable silence that nobody thought to study, because nobody imagined we'd ever voluntarily give it up. That discomfort, it was doing work. Critical, irreplaceable work. Human connection had friction back then. Real friction. You called someone's house and their mom answered. You made plans, and you couldn't cancel 45 seconds before. You showed up. You were bored together. You sat in silences that weren't awkward. They were just real. And that friction, it turns out, was building something in your brain. Tolerance. Presence. The ability to be with another person without performing for them. That capacity is now, for millions of people, almost completely gone. Then, between roughly 2004 and 2012, something changed. MySpace, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube comments, Reddit. Each platform arrived with a promise, connection, community, a way to be seen, and people were desperate for it, understandably, beautifully even. The first wave of social media genuinely felt like a miracle. Like the internet had finally figured out what it was for. Nobody asked what it was built on. Nobody read the engine specs. But the miracle had an engine. And the engine ran on attention. Not your happiness, not your well-being, your attention, measured in seconds, monetized by advertisers, optimized by algorithms that didn't care what you felt when you put your phone down, only that you picked it back up again. The product was never the platform. The product was never the feed. The product was you, your attention, packaged and sold 1,000 times a day to people you'll never meet for purposes you never agreed to. Here's the neuroscience, and I'll make it fast because it matters. Your brain has a reward circuit. At its core is dopamine. And here's where the textbooks lied to you. Dopamine is not the pleasure chemical. That's a myth that will not die. Dopamine is the anticipation chemical. It spikes not when you get the reward, but right before. In the moment of wanting, of almost having. It's the chemistry of the chase. Now imagine someone figured out how to weaponize that. Imagine they built it into a product 2 billion people carry in their pockets. In the 1950s, B.F. Skinner put pigeons in boxes with levers. When the lever gave food every single time, the pigeons pressed it calmly. When the lever gave food randomly, sometimes yes, sometimes no, the pigeons went insane, compulsive, couldn't stop pressing. Sound familiar? That's your Instagram feed. Engineered randomness. Pull down to refresh. Maybe something amazing, maybe nothing. Your brain cannot resist this. The like button, invented at Facebook in 2009, was one of the most psychologically consequential design decisions in human history. Its original creator, Justin Rosenstein, later said he regretted it, because what it did was take something ancient and primal, the human need to be seen and valued by your tribe, and it quantified it, turned it into a number, a public number anyone could see, that could go up or down, that you could obsessively refresh. And the moment that happened, the way teenagers understood their own worth changed permanently. Here's where it all connects. Every mechanism we've covered, the variable rewards, the dopamine loops, the quantified validation, they were sold to us as connection. The Surgeon General of the United States declared loneliness a public health epidemic in 2023. Reported loneliness has doubled since the 1980s. And the more time people spend on social media, study after study confirms, the lonelier they feel. We built the most sophisticated communication infrastructure in human history, and we used it to make ourselves the most isolated generation ever recorded. That's not an accident. That's the product working exactly as designed. Here's a question I want you to hold for the next few minutes, because the answer is more disturbing than you're expecting. Who built these systems, and did they know what they were doing to you? There are really only two possibilities. Either the smartest, most well-resourced engineers in human history stumbled accidentally into the most effective psychological manipulation tools ever created. Or they didn't stumble. I'm going to come back to that, because the answer changes everything about what we owe ourselves in response. Let's talk about what happened to teenagers, because that's where the data gets undeniable. Between 2010 and 2015, right as smartphone ownership crossed 50% among American teens, rates of depression, anxiety, and self-harm in adolescent girls nearly doubled, not crept up. Clinical psychologist Jean Twenge has spent a decade documenting this. She calls the generation born after 1995 iGen, the first generation to grow up with smartphones in their hands from the beginning. And they are, by every available mental health metric, significantly worse off than the ones who came before. In 2021, a whistleblower named Frances Haugen walked out of Facebook with tens of thousands of internal documents. What those documents showed was this: Facebook's own researchers had concluded that Instagram was making body image issues significantly worse for teenage girls. They knew. They had the data. And internally, executives debated what to do. The answer they landed on? Tweak the algorithm slightly. Continue optimizing for engagement, because engagement is revenue, and your daughter's self-esteem was not a line item on the balance sheet. And they didn't just know internally. Some of them said it out loud. Sean Parker, Facebook's founding president, gave an interview in 2017 where he explained exactly how the platform was designed. Quote, "How do we consume as much of your time and conscious attention as possible? We need to give you a little dopamine hit every once in a while. It's a social validation feedback loop." He called it, his words, exploiting a vulnerability in human psychology. The man who helped build it is describing it as an exploit. That's the word they use in hacking. An exploit is when you find a flaw and you use it to get inside something that didn't invite you in. Now here's where I need to slow down, because by this point you might be thinking, okay, this is a story about addiction, dopamine loops, bad products, vulnerable teenagers. Classic addiction narrative. And that framing isn't wrong exactly, but it's incomplete in a way that matters. Because addiction, traditionally, is about a substance that hijacks your brain's reward system from the outside. What social media did is something more insidious than that. It didn't just hijack your reward system, it got inside your sense of self. And that is a fundamentally different kind of problem. Here's what I mean by getting inside your sense of self. When you're a teenager, or honestly, when you're anyone navigating who you are, you need a stable mirror. You need feedback from the world, but you need to be able to hold it loosely, to hear it, weigh it, and decide what to do with it. What social media does is make that mirror into a slot machine. Your sense of how you're doing, how you look, how funny you are, whether your opinion matters, is now contingent on a number that refreshes in real time and was engineered to be unpredictable. You are not building a self. You are performing for an algorithm that has no idea who you are. And the longer you perform, the harder it gets to remember which one is real. So what do you do with this? I'm not going to tell you to delete the apps. That's the lazy answer, and it mostly doesn't work because the problem isn't the apps. It's that we handed over the parts of ourselves that need boredom and silence and friction and unperformed connection, and we never asked for them back. What actually works, and what the research suggests, is not abstinence. It's substitution with intention. Replace the scroll with something that demands your full presence. Badly. Imperfectly. A conversation where you can't edit what you said. A walk with no destination. You have to practice being a person again instead of a profile. And it will feel wrong at first, genuinely uncomfortable, because your brain has been trained to interpret boredom as a problem to be solved immediately. But that discomfort, that's not emptiness. That's the space where your actual self lives. So go back to this morning. You reaching for your phone before a word was spoken, before your eyes had fully adjusted to the light. Here's what I want you to see now that you couldn't see then. You weren't doing that because you're weak or addicted or broken. You were doing it because something was designed with enormous sophistication and enormous resources to make sure you would. The boredom they stole from you wasn't nothing. It was the raw material of a self. It was the silence where your thoughts could actually form without being performed. And you can have it back. Not all of it. The world is different now, and it's not going back. But enough of it to matter. Enough to remember that the loneliness you feel in a room full of notifications was never your fault. It was the product working exactly as designed. The only question now is whether you decide to keep using the product, or to build something better instead.